So I want to go back to that analogy of the yard. Who is in the yard?
Yeah, right.
So what's in my yard versus what's in my in-laws' yard?
Yeah.
And are they trying to mess with something that's in our yard? I don't mean that in a mean way. I just want to get clear definition. The potato patch, the kids, that's our yard.
Right.
We're in charge of that. We're accountable to the Lord with that, but I'm in charge of the potato patch. I need my in-laws to respect that.
Yeah.
I need my parents to respect that.
Welcome to the Hope in Real Life podcast with Jason Gore. Our team is passionate and committed to bringing you more hope in the everyday, real areas of your life. If this conversation and content is valuable for you, please do us a favor. Like, subscribe, and even share. You never know how valuable it could be to share a little bit of hope with someone else. Let's get the conversation started. Hope in Real Life family, welcome to part 2 of a conversation that we are calling Face the Friction, dealing with conflict inside of our relationships. We are here with a very special guest, April Miller, and we're going to pick back up talking about what healthy boundaries look like inside of our relationships. Here we go.
Like the Bible talks about, we want to be of one accord. What can I do so that we can get into that same space? Don't think of compromise as losing. Think of it as finding that place of accord, one accord.
That's great. And I think in relationships, whether it's learned or a pattern or there are some people, and all of it maybe find ourselves in places where we go in with that mentality of, I'm not really here to compromise. I am here to win.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am here to get my yes. But if that happens over and over again, we use the word boundaries. Like at some point, someone might have to put up a boundary. Mm-hmm. How do we think about boundaries as it relates to our spouse? Because it's not like you say, okay, time away, mm-hmm. we can talk again in a week or mm-hmm. something like that. Mm-hmm. So what does that look like? And then mm-hmm. how do boundaries play a role in healthy communication?
So I'm a big fan of Henry Cloud, and he often writes books with Gary Townsend. They have several books on boundaries. And I borrow an analogy from him. He talked about one time, think about your life as a yard, and the yard has a fence around it. And so I picked that up and I've just kind of run with it. But when we get married, so we have this yard, you're a yard when we're not children, but when we become adults and we leave our parents' yard. Right. You have a yard, I have a yard. Well, you and your spouse have a yard. I shouldn't do this with you, sorry.
You and John have a yard. We got it. Yeah.
When you got married, you merged those yards together. Yeah. All right? And now we share fence line with new people. I now have his mom in my life and his dad in my life and his brother and vice versa, right? People, coworkers, things like that. For old friends that they, that are dear to them now share a fence line with me and my husband. But even within that yard, there should still be a very low fence line between you and your spouse. Low for me represents transparency. I should be able to see over that fence line into my spouse's yard and see everything that's going on and vice versa. When we're safe and we're in a good relationship, that fence line is low. Right. We raise fence lines to reduce transparency, and I do that with unsafe people or people who shouldn't be privy to certain things. But back to my spouse, there should be a low fence line between the two of us. What it represents is areas that I shouldn't be in charge of and shouldn't be doing for him or vice versa. I cannot walk with God for my husband. I cannot take care of my body or his body, I should say, for my husband. I can't manage his work relationships for him. Those are things that are still his to do. But I can look over, maybe I have a conversation about, hey, I noticed you haven't been taking your multivitamin. Or I noticed, you've been, struggling with that coworker and it seems like things aren't going well. Do you want to talk about it a little bit? But at the end of the day, I'm going to respect the boundary and I'm going to let you do what's yours to do. When we are aware of those boundary lines, that can help us have cleaner compromises and cleaner conflict communication because I'm not trying to be in charge of things that I'm not supposed to be.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. So in that, if someone is seemingly stepping over the fence line, at some point you got to be able to talk about that as well. What would you say are good ways to set up those boundaries and to be clear about it? Because it sounds like you've had some really good practical examples. How do you set up those boundaries inside of a relationship, but not create more conflict or hurt someone's feelings or create more of a challenge?
Yeah, so First of all, we talked about that butter sandwich. I did that early on purpose. I really wanted us to think about using that butter sandwich.
Right.
You know, I'm going to remind you we're on the same team, but here's my felt need about a boundary. And I'm telling you because we're on the same team. But, I mean, there's a lot of different techniques out there for delivering needs in a healthy way. Another one I'll just bring up here that I like to encourage my couples to use is what the Gottmans, this was borrowed from the Gottmans, they call it a point of agreement. You start with a point of agreement. So, hey, we can both agree.
That I'm the best.
That's exactly where we start.
Okay.
You know, we can both agree that we want to be healthy, but I can't see a life without potato chips. I got to have some potato chips.
Yeah.
Or we can both agree that we want to have great relationships with friends, but I don't want to be home alone 3 nights a week while you're out with your friends.
Right.
So we can both agree, and I think often using that point of agreement first, I'm not responsible for making my spouse. Not,
Okay, now we see how this goes.
that is kind of how it runs in my
Who
house.
works for who?
I'm not responsible for having my spouse not be defensive, but I can set a nice environment for him to be the most successful. And a point of agreement can help with that.
Yeah. So that's within inside of a marriage. And how about boundaries? You know, you mentioned when you get married, that brings a whole nother collection of family members to the table. That can be difficult to navigate those boundaries. How can we establish healthy boundaries, say, with our parents, with our in-laws, and then especially, you know, children show up on the scene and you've got the whole other, what are we going to do at Christmas time? And who gets to spend which grandparent gets to spend how much time? What are some ways of navigating that conflict as well?
Again, kind of staying in those broad strokes, I want to go back to that analogy of the yard. Who is in the yard?
Yeah, right.
So what's in my yard versus what's in my in-laws' yard?
Yeah.
And are they trying to mess with something that's in our yard? I don't mean that in a mean way. I just want to get clear definition. The potato patch, the kids, that's our yard.
Right.
We're in charge of that. We're accountable to the Lord with that, but I'm in charge of the potato patch. I need my in-laws to respect that.
Yeah.
I need my parents to respect that. So I would encourage a nice bread butter bread, and I would encourage it to be the blood relative that maybe delivers that when it comes time, just talking with my person at the person who's violating the boundary at that boundary. I can't guarantee this person will respond well, but I can tell you there's a lot of peace in knowing that you delivered your felt need well and did the best you could to help that person receive it well. Right. They may need a minute to get over it, but I can lay my head on the pillow that night before the Lord and know I did my best. But the potato patch is mine. I have to do it. Yep. The rutabaga, our finances, that's ours. I might come to the fence line with a safe relative, fairly low fence line. What do we mean there? That's communication. I'm letting you know what's going on, or I'm not letting you know what's going on. The transparency, right? If it's a safe relationship, I might ask you hey, can you give us some advice about when to buy a house? Or, I might invite it. But at the end of the day, healthy people let people go back and be adults and be in charge of their own yard. So when I'm thinking through in-laws, when I'm thinking through parents, think about that boundary line. Are they in my yard? Am I being pulled into their yard? Who needs to be where?
Right.
And if they're not in the right spot, it may need to get addressed with a nice butter sandwich, and I would encourage it to be the blood person who does that.
Yeah, 2 things I'd love to even chip in on that.
Yeah.
And one is you just reiterated it again. So, fellas, if you miss this, if you're having a challenge with your wife's family, have the conversation with your wife and allow your wife to have the conversation with her family. Now, obviously, things happen and things get blown out. And at some point, you got to step in and protect. But, we don't want to jump in and say words or do something that's going to create more tension for an extended period of time, for what it's worth.
It can be a we. You go together, but she should be leading the way, I think, on that, or having the conversation on her own. Yeah. I think if it doesn't go well, then maybe you come together, and she still should be leading the way. But, yeah, I would discourage him just jumping the gate and talking. Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is just recognizing, because we just talked through, it's very possible dare I even say likely, that there's going to be times where we're going to make the best butter sandwich and we're going to have it on the plate and we're going to go over there and we're going to present it. And then what we're going to get back is what us just sitting here right now, not in fight or flight mode with no flooding, would say, well, that's an irrational response.
So easy to see.
And that's going to happen. But to your point, like we have to acknowledge the piece of we can only do what we can do. We can't control other people's responses to our attempts for, in this illustration, a great butter sandwich.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, I know me personally, I carry a lot of weight at times as it relates to family. And probably a lot of it has to do with the role that I've carried inside of my family for years of when I don't believe I get that, oh, that makes so much sense, Jason. I get it. I understand. I'm with you. Then I take that on as like extra weight for myself when you really can't control other people's reactions.
And it's at its core, that's a boundary issue, even for you internally.
Yeah.
What am I going to own and what am I not going to own?
You're going to end up charging me for this.
Yeah.
Hope in Real Life family, we just want to take a moment and let you know about a resource that is available to you. I know a lot of our listeners aren't necessarily active in a church, might not even be a Christian. We are still thankful that you're spending time with us. However, we do get asked regularly, how can we find out more about your church or even just about this Jesus guy? And so if that is you, I want you to know you can tune in to gethope.tv. We have live services on Saturday, 4:15 p.m. and 6 p.m., or on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. or 11:15 a.m. Those are Eastern Standard Times. If you can't tune in during those times, we will drop our YouTube link as well as our podcast link down in the show notes. We would love to have you join in with us. Let's keep sharing some hope. Okay, so how about this? How about we communicate healthy boundaries? We say, here's the fence line. We say, hey, this is how high the fence line is on this specific topic, but the boundary continues to be violated.
Yeah.
What are some steps we can take?
Okay, so I want to put this into populations. I mean, there are people in our life that they're continually violating that boundary, and we don't feel God has put a special calling on our heart to be in their lives. Right. They don't have to stay.
No.
You don't have to keep, stay in that relationship. Now, when it comes to family in particular, we're coming up on the holidays, so I really want to keep hitting that one. We want to stay in relationship with them, right? And so one thing is with a violator, you can frequent that fence line less. So maybe I only see you on special occasions, and I don't make myself privy, available to you as much as I used to, just to reduce some of that exposure, because you won't stay in your yard, or you won't stop trying to pull me into your yard. That would be more of a codependent relationship, right? You can also raise the boundary, the fence line. You can raise it, and you can raise it at different levels at different spots. So we all have that Uncle Joe at Thanksgiving. You're like, don't get in a conversation with Uncle Joe about politics or religion, right? So I keep my boundary or my fence line really high.
Especially this year.
Right?
Especially this year.
I keep it really high with Uncle Joe on those topics. I don't tell him how I vote. He doesn't even know where I go to church. But I love talking to Uncle Joe about football and family memories. So you can manipulate your fence line and, again, not have so much transparency in certain areas. But some people are so toxic, you do have to shut down the fence line. Yeah. So if you're dating a guy or a woman and they are constantly in violation of those things, it's okay to shut that down. Or if, occasionally there's an extended family member, there's abuse or something like that, and you don't have to stay in a relationship just because that's your uncle.
What would you say to someone who knows what you just said is true? Probably do need to walk away from the relationship, but for some reason, whether it's guilt, a sense of, but maybe I can fix this person, or I'm the only person that this person has, any number of reasons that just continues to stay at the fence line, even though they know they probably need to walk away. What words of encouragement would you offer to them?
I think the first thing that's occurring to me is do it in community. Don't just stand there in isolation, knowing something's not right, but not feeling like you can fix it. I would engage my peers, my friends, my trusted people to help speak into this with me. Obviously, if you're a Christian, I want to go to the Lord about that. I want to look at biblical principles. There's, one of my favorite verses in Proverbs, which of course it's not going to pop right now, but it might be 10:9. He who walks in integrity walks securely. He who walks in integrity. If you are walking in the truth that that the Lord has put out there, then there's security available to you. You can not second guess or be upset. You can draw that line and not have to feel bad about the consequences, but it can be stolen away if you let it.
Right.
So do it in community, find some accountability. But if you're not doing the right thing, you can either keep doing that pattern or you can do something different.
Right.
In order for the pattern to change, somebody's got to do something different.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we've got to look ourselves in the mirror and say, am I going to do the right thing or not?
Yes.
Okay, so in marriages, we've talked a lot about it, and we're getting close to the end of our time. Say a couple is really dealing with some of these things, whether it's setting boundaries, dealing with conflict in a healthy way. When should a couple consider professional counseling as it relates to a conflict marriage inside of their relationship?
Yeah. I think a good hallmark for that is, are you feeling stuck? Are you feeling stuck? It keeps going the same way. It keeps deteriorating. It's not going well. I don't know how to get out of this pattern. I referenced the Gottmans before. Mm-hmm. In their research, they've come up with what they call the 4 horsemen, hallmarkers of unhealth in a relationship. And the longer they hang around, the worse the relationship's going to get. They've highlighted defensiveness, when people get defensive. They've highlighted withdrawal, when people either physically withdraw or they emotionally withdraw. They're in the same room, but they're not really there anymore. They've highlighted criticism, where you start to become very critical of the person you're with. And they've highlighted contempt, which is where, I just believe now that I am actually better than you. When those things are showing up and communication keeps devolving or deteriorating into that stuck space, it might be a great time to reach out and get a third party to help you work it through.
Wow, that's great. April, I appreciate it. We've talked about a lot. How about to the person who's listening is like, hey, maybe I can't find a way to book a session with April tomorrow, but I'd love to go a little bit further. What resources would you recommend? I know you mentioned Henry Cloud. What podcasts are out there? What are some places that our folks could look to find a little bit more of this conversation if it's helpful for them?
I do like the Gottmans. Obviously, they also have a lot of work out there. I think the church is a good place to go. We were talking earlier. I know Hope offers Reengage. I think it's an amazing class for people to go through. We've gone through it, my husband and I. It's excellent material. And then, I think getting that third party, whether it's a trusted spiritual leader or it moves to a level where you need a professional. I can't stress enough how important it is to do that. Think about marriage. Like with your car, you get tune-ups.
Right.
Even when you go through certain changes of life, season of life changes, it's a good time just to, doesn't mean we're in a crisis, but let's go get a tune-up on how we're communicating. Are our values the same? Are our dreams the same? So, yeah.
April, I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you one question that I ask every single one of our guests. The name of this show is Hope in Real Life. Mm-hmm. And so we try to do everything that we can just to take moments and recognize places and spaces that we're actually looking forward to experiencing some hope in our lives. I would love to hear from you. What are you the most hopeful for within the next 5 years of your life?
So many things, right? And I was thinking about this. I knew you were going to ask this. You started to say something in your sermon on Sunday.
Okay.
And I was hoping you'd clarify it for me. See if I can get you to recall it. But you said something along the lines of the way to make our mark, the most important way. And you started to reference, I thought you were going to say something like, some people would say it's who you raise or something like that.
Okay,
what were you going to say?
I said that some people in life, and I heard this from somewhere. What do they say? Like the first time you quote someone, you have to actually give them credit. And then if you do it again, you can say, like, I've heard it said. And then after the third time, you can say, I've always said. Oh. What I've always said is, often people go through life thinking the most important thing that they ever do is that they're going to accomplish is something that they do, or the most important thing that they're ever going to do is something they accomplish, when in fact, the most important thing that you ever work towards in your life might be someone you raise.
Love that. I thought it was something like that you sort of just lightly alluded to it. Yes. Yeah, it's investment in people.
Yeah.
And not everyone raises children, and they have other ways they're going to invest in people,
Right.
for sure. But we do. John and I have been called to raise 3, and we're at that phase of life where they're starting to launch. And so when you talk about hope in the next 5 years, for me, it's that they will be using their gifts and abilities to God's glory, and that they will truly be in love with Him. And so they're about to leave and start doing that in the real world.
Yeah.
And so we shall see in 5 years what that all looks like. But we've done our best to get those seeds in there.
Well, I've watched from afar, and you and John are incredible people. And yeah, I'm grateful to be able to say that I know you both. I'm thankful for the value add that you guys have been to our church, and now here to this podcast, to our listeners. So thank you for being here. Yeah, to our listeners, listen, this is something that we know every single one of us deal with. Okay, conflict is a part of everyday life. And so I hope that you'll maybe even look into some of these resources. But even more importantly than that, we all know other people that could be struggling with this in their life as well. The whole heartbeat behind this podcast is to bring hope into the everyday moments of other people's lives. So the more you like, the more you subscribe, that helps us get the word out. But I would say to you also, share this episode, share this content with someone that you know could use help in this area. Be careful not to offend them. Hey, I saw you and your husband fighting at the party. You should listen to this podcast. But I'm certain that there's something valuable that they're going to be able to pick up from this. April, thank you again so much for the time. Look forward to having you back on the show.
Thank you. I was honored to be here. Thank you very much.
All right. Hope in Real Life family. We'll talk to you soon on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hope in Real Life podcast. If this content was valuable for you, don't forget, like, subscribe, share. You never know how important it could be to bring a little hope into someone else's life. There's even a place here for you to comment. We would love to hear from you and hear your feedback. Until next time, let's keep sharing hope.